Welcome to The Summit, a podcast focused on bringing you the knowledge and insights for industry leaders. I'm your host, Kyle Hamer, and I'm on a mission to help you exceed your potential.
Thanks for tuning in this week. This week, our guest on Summit is Andrea Lechner-Becker, the CMO at LeadMD. Did I get that right, Andrea?
You did. Yeah, you did excellent.
Welcome to the show. We're super excited to have you. Today, we're going to talk about what's wrong with CMOs. But before we do that, what I'd really like to know is, not what I'd like to know. I think what our guests would like to know is who are you, what do you do, and why do you know so much about CMOs?
Yeah, so my job is a CMO myself. So that's my title. I'm a CMO at a marketing consultancy, which means that all of our clients are marketers. So I am a marketer marketing my marketers to other marketers. So I am completely surrounded by marketing leaders and marketing practitioners all day. It's my job to market to them, and really, because they are my customer, to understand them and to talk to them about what they're struggling with, what they're frustrated with, and all of those things, because we can help them in many ways solution for those things and make their lives easier. So I care about their pain points because that's what my solution solves for.
That's fantastic. By the way, if you added one more M in there, the only one I think that could have been left was marketing for marketers to help them avoid murder. Like, I think you're
yeah.
That's quite a number of M's. And like I said, our topic of conversation today is something that you and I, we have similar, having been in marketing leadership and spending time helping marketers. But it is the crazy case for the CMO kind of becoming dinosaurs and going towards extinct. And anybody who's listened to this is like, what do you mean? What's happening to the CMO? Like, really, really high level. What are you seeing happening in the conversations you're having on a daily basis, or even with your mentors or mentees?
Yeah. So, there's this thing that has been happening for a couple of years, right? Like, there's all this research about the CMO being the C-suite title that has the shortest tenure in the executive suite. And there's also a lot of conversation about CMOs being replaced by CROs. The idea that somebody is going to be in charge of both marketing and sales is the concept of the CRO, boiled down super unscientifically. And so, I think that marketing has a branding problem. So one of the things that I love talking about is a post that Latany over at Sixth Sense, she's Sixth Sense's CMO, that she posted. And I think it came from like a Forbes article or something. And it was this idea that, the CMO title stands for Chief Marketing Officer, typically. And that marketing is a verb. And it's the only C-suite title that has a verb, right? A CFO is a Chief Financial Officer, not a financing officer, right? Chief Revenue Officer is not, Chief Selling Officer, right? Even old CSO, Chief Strategy Officer, or Chief Sales Officer, Chief Information Officer. So like, none of those are the act of doing something except for Chief Marketing Officer. And so in this article, which I don't know how that works, like, we'll go look for it, Google it, I guess. I don't know. But the concept of that article is that CMOs would be better positioned if we gave ourselves the title of Chief Market Officer. So it's our job to understand the market, the buyers, and the macroeconomics that are happening in the industry in which our business is, like the market. And I think that that's like a spot on kind of explanation of what's happening to the CMO, right? Is that too many CMOs have for too long, and this is an old conversation, right? That CMOs are going into boardrooms talking about web page visits and email opens and clicks, and like, yeah, that's a good way to get fired. So I think that CMOs really need to transition our brand to being about the macro economics of the company in which we support, and things like that give us actual value to be sitting in the boardroom, right? Like, I think that even, I tend to not love the focus on attribution, as it's kind of been bastardized through the years. I think even going into a boardroom and trying to prove that we deserve credit for the creation or the influence of leads. Like, I just don't think that has value and people understand it. So I think it's our job as marketers to market ourselves in a much more effective way. I think that's fundamentally the problem, is like, we're not doing internal marketing very well.
Oh my God. If ever there was a branding problem that marketing had, the branding problem happens in the boardroom 99% of the time, right? I mean, for a core tenet of marketing being branding, we sure fail at that inside the four walls of our company.
We do. I mean, and I think, there's a lot of conversation about, just creating the right relationship with your CEO or your CFO. And I often see that even new CMOs in a role, in their first 90 days, they're looking to redo the website, generate leads, relook at their buyers, blah, 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 blah. And I always encourage anybody that I talk to that's a new CMO to invest a ton of time creating actual relationships with your peers and your boss, right? So like, who's your boss? Depending on, what your board situation looks like, it's your board and your CEO, and your peers are your CFO. Yes, it's sales, but like, the CFO relationship is a deal killer, right? Like, if they do not see the value of marketing historically, and you have to go to them and say you need $200,000 to create a community of advocates, like, you are fucked from jump, right? Like, there's no way you get the authority or approval to do something like that if you don't have the right relationships, because you don't have trust right away. So you have to first develop trust. And it's the exact same thing that you'd say to somebody who's trying to connect with a buyer, right? Like, you have to develop trust with them. They don't trust you to just come in and say you're going to solution for it. They're not going to take a meeting with you. It's the same with your CFO and your CEO. Like, I think it's vastly underestimated the importance of managing your relationships with your C-suite peers.
It's fun to talk to somebody who shares a similar point of view on the world. And the reason that I say that is, I don't know how many people that I talk to, and you're 100% right. They're like, I got to come in and I got to drive leads. Leads for what? Who's your customer? Well, I know my customer because I was at this other company. That other company had a different client profile, might be similar industry, but you're now at a different company. Do you have the same customer service team? Do you have the same sales motion? Do you have the same accounting and business practices? Probably not. Where are you going to learn those things at? Well, you can learn them from the customers, but the shortest distance is usually by building those relationships internally. And too often, marketers are focused on arts and craft and messaging and things that are bigger picture versus just selling internally. Hey, does this person across the aisle trust me to make a good decision? To your point of, if I go ask for $200,000 or $2 million, do they actually understand what I'm asking for? And, being able to sell internally. You brought up something though that I think is interesting when it comes to commanding time or asking for time from your CEO. CEOs today are probably more educated as it relates to what's required in the market. And when I say that education, I mean the CEOs of maybe 20 years ago, it was a lot more industrial manufacturing. They were focused on operations, logistics, fulfillment, there was still sales definitely involved, but there wasn't this heavy lean into digital marketing. And I can quantify where revenue came from in these elements. The CEOs today are definitely looking at those things and consider themselves experts. How do you begin having those conversations and building those relationships when the guy across from the table feels like he's smarter than you?
Tell him he is, right? Like, my big thing is, like, I really don't, I'm not really a confrontational person. And I really advocate for the idea of, like, in marketing, and Jason Lemkin has this great post on SaaStr about how, most CEOs think they're the real CMO, and it's your job as a CMO to drive the reporting of what worked and what didn't, and tell them ideas that you have. But he makes a great point in there where, if you are going to argue with your CEO that doing X is wrong and doing Z is right, you better not fuck that shit up. Because if you say, I refuse to do this because I think it's wrong, I want to do this instead, you have to be sure you're right. And how often can you be sure that you are right in marketing? Like 0% of the time, right? Like marketing is half science and half art. And the art part of marketing is totally unpredictable. So like, I personally would never put my job on the line to tell a CEO he's wrong about this thing that he wants to do. What I would do is figure out a way to test it on the cheap versus my idea on the cheap. And then I would let the results speak for themselves. Because to your point, all a CEO wants is the best end result, which is always revenue, right? Like, unless you work for a nonprofit and then it's membership maybe, but for the most part, for-profit companies are trying to sell more business. So if Z ends up winning, I also very, very rarely, and if you found a CEO who, when Z works, doesn't want to go all in and say, okay, yeah, X didn't work. Okay, great. I don't care. Let's go with Z. Then you have the wrong CEO. And I think that's a totally different problem. But like, for the most part, like I encourage people to just like, why are you arguing? Right? Like, why are you arguing with the CEO? Like, he probably is really smart. I kind of have the same approach to salespeople, frankly, right? Like when marketers want to argue with sales that they don't know how to use content correctly, or they don't know how to follow up on it. Like, why are you arguing about such stupid things? Like, just embrace it. Like, if you just changed your mind and said like, okay, what content would work for you? Or like, what are you using instead? What do you think the client base needs, right? Like sellers are on the front lines way more than marketers. So I just think that sometimes marketers let our ego get in the way. And I'm just an advocate of like, be collaborative, right? Like you have a CEO who has an idea, great, go do it. Go do it. Like, go do it, test it. If it doesn't work, then yeah, don't do it again. But like, I just think that's a lot of wasted energy, and like, it is going to ruin, it's going to hurt your relationship with that person. So like, don't do that. Just figure out a way to do it. Figure out a way to say yes.
So it's really interesting to hear you say that, because I think one of the things that CMOs get really tired of hearing, or at least marketing leaders in general, is almost every conversation they have across the aisle at the business table starts with no. Hey, can I? No. Hey, I was thinking, no. How about we try? No. And is there budget for? No. And yet there's this idea or expectation that the arts and crafts department is going to drive revenue with conversations that start with no. How do you re-engineer those so that, to your point, where you're used to saying yes and they're used to coming to you and constantly getting yes, that's flipped on its head, and now they're giving you yeses in return as you're asking for things?
Yeah, I mean, I think, data is super powerful, right? You just have to use it in the right way. So what's hidden in that yes concept is, I might think, well, that's never going to work, right? But I've also been around the block long enough to know that things that I think have no shot in hell of returning revenue work awesome, right? Like, I just don't have any ego about my ability to predict what my buyer is going to do, because I've been proven wrong so many times, right? From like small things of subject line tests to big things of major digital versus event strategies, right? Like, I just don't think that any of us can predict what is going to work. So I'm a big proponent of testing it, measuring it. So I think that that's the biggest thing though. Like, you have to be really strong at being able to measure results and then go tell that story. So that feedback loop is also something that marketers are typically very, very bad at, right? Like, if something goes well, and I think just in general, like, especially in B2B, so much of it becomes a stoic exchange of like, we participated in a webinar and generated 423 new leads. 200 of them have become MQLs. 100 of them have become SALs. Like, who wants to fucking sit there and listen to that story? No one. So it's, again, your job as a marketer to internally market what your performance is, what's working, what's not, right? Like, and I think that the less human you are about that exchange, even internally, the less buy-in that you get. So I'm a big proponent of like, very quickly getting feedback on events that we do and like hounding sellers that were there. Like, what is possible here to grab out of this? And then telling that story really rapidly to the people who need to know and care, which in my organization, it's very small, right? We're 50 people. It's my CEO and my CFO, essentially, or my controller. Like, they're the people that pay the bills, and they need to know, like, okay, that vendor was dog shit. We're never doing that again. Instead, I'm going to go test this vendor. It's half the price. Like, might as well see what that's about. Or I'm going to go test this vendor that's twice the price, but that one was terrible. And I'm going to ask for, 20% refund or whatever I can get from that vendor, blah. And it's just about, like, from my perspective, it's about communication, because I think that despite everyone saying, like, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt. I know you're working hard. Like, silence is a killer, right? Like, if you're not communicating what's happening in marketing in a regular, absorbable, fun way, like, everybody thinks you're just sitting around, like, not doing anything or not seeing any results. So it's your job to tell them what's what.
Can you get other team members to agree to what yes looks like on the front end? And what I mean by that is, and you talked about measuring it, but to the point that you made in the previous answer, or your previous statement earlier, you said, oh, marketers come in and we've got all of these vain marketing metrics. Hey, look at how many people showed up to the website. And oh, check this out. My open rate was at 37. Like, if it's not impacting revenue, the boss probably doesn't care. So there's some level of buy-in agreement that happens on the front end. What are some strategies as the chief market officer that you can take and leverage to define success on the front end?
Yeah, I mean, I do think, in terms of the creation of the right metrics to care about, I do think, I'm very fortunate. My CEO is a marketer, which is also the thing that I think, like, is the unspoken of a lot of the people that talk about thought leadership in our space, is like, how many of us, work at Engagio, right? Like, okay, when John Miller's your CEO, you have a totally different scenario than when your CEO is a developer not from MarTech, right? Like, marketing, and especially MarTech, has this like very specific little nucleus of human beings who totally get it, and it's a much easier conversation. So I think that in order to get the right metrics, because when I tell Justin that I'm investing in SEO, he gets it, right? Like, he understands that the flow of how information is consumed in the digital age is that a lot of people are coming to our blog months and months and months and months and months ahead of when they're actually going to be ready to purchase. And we have to invest in that now, or when they're ready for purchase, they went to all of our competitors' websites, and those are the only people that are in the deal cycle. But if you have a CEO or a CFO that doesn't understand that, which is not, it's not their discipline. Like, how would they understand it? You have to educate them. Like, that's your job. So in terms of like the explicit metrics, I think you just have to be able to explain where you're investing and what impact it has along the way. So like, and you can use tons of resources, right? Like, Google does a ton of research about buyer journeys that you can use. Obviously, it's a super reputable source. Gartner, Forrester, like, you can paint the picture using all of this third-party research of, I'm investing 30% of my budget in top of funnel, because when you look at our competitors right now, you can see that we are way behind and we need to catch up. Or I'm telling you what's happening right now in deal cycles is that people are going to those sites to get the information. And then once our competitor A, has them on their website, they're nurturing them, they're marketing to them, they're selling to them. They know who they are. I can't even tell who this person is unless I go by 6 cents. And then I know that they're in the market for the kind of stuff that we sell. But really, we're putting ourselves at an incredible competitive disadvantage by not investing here. That's why I'm dropping 30% of my budget in that top of funnel, because I got to get those people to our website now. Stop the bleeding. Our deal cycle is already 6 months, right? How long do you think people are looking before that? They sign 3-year contracts with companies like us. So they're looking a year before their contract's up. we need to be there. So it's just about like, and again, you can kind of tell by the way that I'm painting that story that like, that's how I think these conversations should go, is very much fear-based, right? Like nobody wants to, I mean, when you look at really like how a company grows, right? Like the majority of companies are looking to steal or gain in market share, right? So like using your competitors as the launching point to say they're doing this and they're doing it a lot better than us and it's costing us business, it's a pretty easy business case, right? Like if I can take half of what that competitor is getting in market, I think that would return this amount of money for that investment. Like, trust me. But I also think, there was this really interesting, I'm going to forget the source of it, but they did research on 5 CEOs that got fired. And it was like 4 of them should have never gotten fired because they actually were doing the right strategic things. It just took longer than anyone expected. So I think it's also the CMO's job to say like, some of this stuff that I do is playing the long game. And the long game is not a year. It is not 2 years. It is 5 years. And I think in the SaaS world, that is actually a fairly hard sell because most of these SaaS CEOs are building businesses to sell them. Most people aren't building IBMs and GEs anymore, right? Like they aren't building companies so that their grandchildren's grandchildren have a job. Like that's not what's happening. They're building companies to sell it to a huge conglomerate through M&A, make their payday, and then go be an angel investor or go build something else. Like they're churn and burning these companies. So it's like, for a marketer that wants to try to build a business and a brand over the next 5 years, you've got to find a CEO that's in that with you.
It's really interesting to hear you talk about a couple of things. And I think one of the things that's really, really hard for marketing leaders is being comfortable in discomfort and telling people the truth, even if it's not what somebody wants to hear. And the reason that I say that is the last role I was in when I was in marketing leadership, the company came to me and they said, okay, here's our situation. What's our timetable? We want to grow market share 20% year over year. And I looked at them and I said, that's impossible. I said, in year 3 might be able to do 20% year over year, but you have a systems problem. You have a process problem. We don't have like the first year is just to stop the bleeding. Like we're losing market share this year. Like we're just hanging on. Like this first year is just stop the bleeding, to your point of 30% content, right? It's like, we just have to do these things. The second year is about getting healthy and adding these other elements to make sure that the business can absorb it, sales knows how to use these tools, and that we can actually start to hit the accelerator. And by year 3, then we can really punch it. Now you're looking at 20, 30% year over year. But logistically, unless you're going to quadruple the size of the team, and oh, by the way, that's probably not realistic, right? Just because there's just some basic blocking and tackling that needs to get done. You're looking at a 3-year turnaround. And like, I thought they were going to hand me a pink slip when I told them that. Like, it was the most uncomfortable conversation ever. Yet the beginning of year 4, at the beginning of year 4, the lead volume, the sales volume, all of those things were now replicating what we had expected, but they wanted it within 90 to 120 days. And I think sometimes it's just market officers need to say, you've put yourself in a position where you can't get there. It's like a person who might be overweight and wants to lose weight. You're not going to lose that 40 pounds you put on by the end of the month. If you do, you're risking the health of your body. Same thing for your business. I love
that analogy. That is a great analogy.
You didn't get her overnight. You're not going to fix it overnight. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so, I love that.
One of the things that I think might also be interesting, it'd be really cool to get your perspective on this is, man, marketing leaders really love their buzzwords, right? Whether it's conversational marketing or inbound marketing or content marketing or, oh my God, account-based marketing. Like, can we sprinkle a little marketing in any other adjectives, please? This will be great. How should a market officer make their decision on types of strategies they deploy in order to be success?
That's a big question. I mean, I think I hate anything that's cliche, right? And the "it depends" is like the most cliche consultant answer that ever existed. So I'm really trying to think of a way to say it depends without having to say it, but I just said it like 3 times, so I guess that failed. I would say, you know, it's interesting because we do focus groups with marketing leaders and sales leaders. And when we did our first one, I remember just, it was very clear to me that marketing leaders do talk in buzzwords. We talk about technology a lot. And it wasn't until the sales conversation that happened after the marketing leader conversation where I realized that sales leaders talk a lot more about the business and actual strategy than marketing leaders typically do when you put marketing leaders together. So
if I had an applause button, like we'd have little applause cheering in the background because you're 100% spot on with that. 100%.
Yeah. So, I mean, even just as like a small microcosm of the way that ends up matriculating is I got on with a bunch of marketing leaders talking about podcasting, right? And it immediately was like, what technology do you use to scale it? And blah, 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 blah. And it was like, at what point are we going to have the conversation about what buyers resonate with podcasts, right? Like who do these work for? And not just where does it convert and at what rate and blah, 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 but like really like who consumes podcasts? Because it's not everyone. Not everyone consumes content on LinkedIn. Not everyone consumes fun content. I feel like there's also this push in a lot of our little community of thought leadership LinkedIn things of being like, talk to people like humans. Like just because I'm a consumer, just because I work at an enterprise as a marketing leader doesn't mean I want to be talked like it. Well, but you're a marketer, right? If you're a CFO, like a lot of CFOs are pretty serious. You know what I mean? Like putting emojis on your shit if you're trying to sell to a CFO, like, I don't know, kind of a joke, right? Like you kind of saw even with Zoom, right? Like when the pandemic happened and people started using Zoom, there was a lot of people who were like, this is not a secure platform for us to do, right? Like, and Zoom is a major company, was doing good business, went through a bunch of security reviews, but like that type of customer who's going to look at your product with a keener eye than everyone else who's coming into your market, that's really different. So I think, and sellers tend to think and talk about stuff like that. So all of that to say that in the focus groups that we have with sales, something that constantly comes up is that they appreciate marketing for brand. The number of marketers that get that sellers understand brand super well, and actually that's where they see the most value. I barely ever hear a marketer go, my sellers love me because I build a great brand. And the reason that sellers care about brand is because they do not want to be embarrassed. When a company has a great brand, it makes their life a lot easier. You don't have to go on to a first call and explain what the company is, where you come from, that you can be trusted, who your customers are. When you have a great brand, that's already done for you. So we know a lot of reps from like early Marketo days, and Marketo has had a great brand for almost a decade. So they were used to going into calls and people knew who they were. They knew who John Miller was. They knew who Phil Fernandez was. They trusted the brand to a degree that those sellers appreciated a little bit, but then they went someplace without brands in the market and they were like, oh, wow, this sucks. Like, this is now terrible. Like, I have 3 times the work to do. Like, I need marketing to work on my brand, what is the hardest thing for marketers to get budget for? Brand activities that don't directly tie to attribution and ROI. So like there's a big, and again, like I tend to kind of go back to like, it's a storytelling problem, right? Like if you went to your CEO and you said, listen, sales does not want to go and be embarrassed on their first calls. You want to know why I'm at that trade show that doesn't really return anything? It's because if I'm not, then people start forgetting about us, and all of our biggest competitors are. So am I generating leads there? No, but I'm having first, second, third conversations, and honestly, like I'm just there and big and people remember me. And so there are things that marketers can do, of course, around, you know, what's the fancy word for the surveys that they're not just brand surveys. There's like a fancier
Your
recall survey
NPS?
or something like that.
Oh,
No, it's like
yeah.
a kind of like a recall, right? Like where you're not necessarily talking about your brand, but you're trying to just figure out like how much you resonate. Anyways, there's a smart marketing term that I don't know about it.
Yeah. Speaking of buzzwords, there's one that's probably sitting on the name
Oh
of
yeah,
that survey, right?
totally. Yeah. And so there's like lots of ways that you can like try to capture some of that squishiness, but I also just think that like there is a lot of value and people resonate with stories, right? And experiences. And so the more that marketing leaders go in with their deck of just numbers and ROI, I think that it's important, but it's not the whole ask, right? Like you have to be able to paint why those numbers are important in a really humanistic way. And to some extent, you know, you can kind of feel when your marketing's working and when you're not. Like I've talked to a lot of companies, you talk to a lot of companies, right? Like when you go out on the internet and you see drift in every chatbot conversation, there is a reason. Like they did a ton of stuff to make that brand what it is, but that brand is a brand in the market and it has dominated that category, not the category of conversational marketing, because that's what they created and whatever. And you got to do, you know, you got to play the SaaS game. I get it. Those of us, so there's some of us that are like, that's so silly.
It's
You're a
cheeky.
chatbot. You're a chatbot, but okay. But I mean, really, like they've done an awesome job, right? And like, it's not really that hard to see, right? Like whatever amount David Cancel put into marketing, worth it. Probably could have spent double and it still would be worth it because their brand is strong and it shows in their results.
Well, and I think the part that's really interesting about that is, hey guys, Drift wasn't first on the market. A long time ago, actually many, many, many years ago, there was a company called Olark. They couldn't figure out, like it was a solid product, but they could never figure out how to tell their message and incorporate it into what made it feel like it was a fabric of a website or the fabric of a sales call. Well, Drift just took something that was common sense and made it go, huh, that's right. Chat makes sense because it's part of a conversation. And then they talked about everything around it. And all of a sudden you were like, wow, that's exactly right. HubSpot did the same thing when they coined the term inbound marketing. When that first came out, everybody was like, the hell are you talking about? And then the second you heard inbound and you're like, oh, inbound leads. Oh, well, my sales team is in this predictive model, always calling. They're doing outbound. Of course, marketing should be doing inbound. This makes lots of sense. Sounds to me like it's, you know, these are two examples of companies that understood how to listen to the market and feed back to them in a very simple way what they were asking for, which is the job of the chief market officer, right?
I think so. I mean, I think there's also just this underpinning that a lot of people don't talk about, which is, you know, you kind of have the awareness, the consideration stage early at your top of funnel, right? That people talk about. And people generally kind of talk about like, it's your job to educate the buyer. But like the number of people that are doing that really well, you know, like content marketing has sort of moved to this place where there's a lot of thought leadership that talks in like these high level concepts, but not a lot of actual education talking about very specific things that people need to know in order to do their jobs better. And I just think the direct line in B2B, it requires a really strong viewpoint from marketing leaders in general, not just the chief market officer, but everyone, right? What are people struggling with in their jobs? And yes, how does our product or service help them do that? But like, what else do they need to know, right? Like I wrote a post recently about like, what the fuck is content syndication in B2B marketing? Because I literally, when I first started trying to understand it, I was like, no, I like don't get it. Like, what is this thing? And I would try to go to vendors and they like wouldn't just explain to me. And content syndication is an interesting thing, right? Because sort of by nature a little sneaky, and they like don't want to really explain it to you, but like that's the type of thing that people actually need that like most people aren't doing. So everyone is doing their top 5 ways to get ABM in, I don't know, employed in your organization, right? But very few articles and posts exist that like really help someone practically make the business case for ABM and like share things, right? Like the number of times where the biggest value people get out of a conversation is like, hey, would you just like share your budget with me? Like I'm struggling with like just the categories of my marketing budget. Can you share that with me? And then you share it and they're like, oh my God, this is amazing, right? Like there's this weird film of like, I'm adding value to my buyer. And it's like, but you're not, like there are very few and very specific things that kind of everybody wants that are really hard to get by Googling.
Yeah. And by the way, so it's funny to hear you say that, the couple of things that you touched on. First of all, when it comes to budget, I mean, there's a 1,000 different things that are out there that you can pull in, but understanding how other people are looking at it, how they're categorizing it, where things are going, what their mix is, it's hard to pull that all together. And you can go grab a template, but you're going to get template that's like advertising, services, software, good luck. Right? You're kind of like, what goes into the good luck bucket? But to your point of giving information away or creating stuff that's valuable, the part that I think is really interesting is if you look at what I would call market adjacent, and we go into like make money online, these people that have been doing information marketing for years, they've taken things that were, I think at one point I bought a $3.95 book off of a guy, and it was almost a direct copy of the basic principles from good to great, with his guy had his own little paragraphs and descriptions around it, right? And so it's really interesting. I was like, oh, I think this is going to be really valuable, because everything that I was reading, everything that I was consuming off of these sales pages, off of this information was like, oh my gosh, I need that. Oh my gosh, I need that. Oh my gosh, I need that. And then when I opened up what I paid $3.95 for, it was another, sell me a little bit more, but it was like, oh, well, this is stuff you already told me on the sales page. Okay, this is kind of nice. But like, there was this perceived value of, I need the transaction of what's next. And too often, I think marketers take the inverse perspective, which is, we'll give you as little possible, we'll give you as little as possible, give you as little as possible. You want to come behind more. It's like, no, be more generous. Give it all away for free. And then they show up and they're like, wait, you don't have anything extra to offer? No, I told it all to you, plain and simple. Well, what value are you going to add? I can show you how to do it because I've done it, right? Like there's the application part. So it's really interesting to me how we perceive the value of content and what's actually valuable to folks. We think of content more as an ad versus a content as an encyclopedia. By the way, you're also on mute.
Yeah. I was yelling at my husband, so muted real quick.
Tell him seen and not heard.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree that it's, and I think that this again, and I don't know, I'm workshopping how to explain this in a news bite type format, but I do think that a lot of marketers, especially because, content marketing has like a conceptual, and most things probably in marketing have their conceptual value and then their nitty-gritty tactical application and how that impacts behaviors, right? So like the philosophical reason to create, if you really didn't care about money, right? And you just wanted to create content that helps people, right? Like you wanted all of your blogs to just help people do their job better, and you really didn't have any other reason to do it. The way that you would do it is very different, even for us, right? Like that content syndication article, like I use the words together, content syndication, more than I would naturally do. Now, why? Because I want it to rank for content syndication. and I want it to rank for B2B. So I have to use the words B2B in there a little bit more than I normally would too. And so I think that, to some extent, how technical our job has become in order to influence, sort of the street cred that we get, has impacted the customer experience in a way that is pretty obvious, but I don't know that I have a better suggestion for, you know what I mean? Like at the end of the day, like, it's the same, like we've pushed a bunch of our customers to G2 to give us reviews, right? Like, do I really want that? Not really. Like people go to G2 under the hope that they're going to get a realistic perspective of who's great to work with and who's not. But the reality is, like, we have a great review there because we've pushed a bunch of people there, and a bunch of other people that are our competitors haven't done that. So like, are we really better than, you know what I mean? Like it's not real. Like a lot of the stuff in B2B is kind of like that, where it's like, and Google's algorithm and where you place for content, I guess, is not just B2B. Of course, it's got B2C connotations too. But I think that there's a lot of that in our world where you're constantly balancing the conceptual, like, right thing to do with the reality that if you do that just feels right, you probably aren't going to get the results that you want. So it's trying to balance how much of your soul do you give up to place somewhere or to do something. I mean, content syndication is a lot like that too, right? Like, I mean, you're basically just buying leads and you kind of know it. Hopefully they have some larger interest in the content that you provided the vendor, but like, there's a good chance that the people that you're getting on that list never did jack shit, right? Like the bot that their IT department set up clicked on that email. They didn't even click on it, right? So like, I mean, there's all of that where I think, I'm not so purist that I don't recognize that, like, there's a lot of our world that's like that too. And it's just your job to, I think, as a leader, balance as much of it as you can, while remaining innovative and figuring out what the next best thing is that can give the customer experience that you want for your buyer.
And it's really great actually to hear you touch on a couple of those things, because I think as we circle all the way back to the beginning, and we're getting close to the end here, but as we circle all the way back to the beginning, you started off by saying it's the only position in the company that's a verb, and we need to make it the chief market officer. If you understand the market, you understand the dynamics, you understand where are the areas that I need to buy, where are the areas I need to sell, where are the areas that I need to provide influence, and to do all of the things that help you achieve your goals. And sometimes that's being sneaky with content syndication and keyword manipulation. We won't say stuffing, right? Or it's picking the strategy based on it depends. But as the chief market officer, it's your job to understand those things and the nuance of it, and keep the rest of your business leadership and team motivated and engaged, so that over time you can create that thing that you talked about that was so valuable, right? That 5-letter word that 10 years ago was super important, but everybody thought of it as arts and crafts. Oh, I want to work on my brand. Oh, you mean you want to work on new colors and a new mark? Yeah, my brand. That's not your brand. Your brand is an extension of who you are as a company, how you behave, and how you do all of these things to deliver your service. And I think that so many companies miss that because they're focused on, like I said, calling marketing the arts and crafts, and to your point, the verb of the company, right? Yeah. They're the doers.
Well, and it's hard because there is so much tactical deployment that marketers have to do, right? Like one single email I was talking on some other podcast about, the number of technologies you need just to do a webinar, right? Like it's not even just the webinar. You then have to integrate the form to sign up on some other platform, and then you have to capture registrants, and you have to manage those leads, and blah, 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 and you have to record it. And then where do you put the recorded webinar once you're done with it? Do you go to YouTube? Like there's a million different technologies, and there's a million little steps to most marketing initiatives that leave the risk of getting really sucked in to the whirlpool that is getting campaigns into market, which is a main function of the marketing department, right? Like we have to be out marketing our companies. So I think it's just really important for a marketing leader, and again, whether that's the chief market officer or VPs of marketing, to balance and to give themselves space and time and challenge themselves too, to think more holistically, to not get sucked in to the technology and the tactic. I think that's our biggest charge. And again, like think about, okay, if you're going to tell the story of your investment to someone, like take the time to craft that, like really like trust your team to craft those email messages and all of that stuff. And like you spend your time crafting as a CMO, crafting the message of what your team is doing and what impact you're having on the market and on the buyers, and like invest more time in that story because it's going to get you more.
I was going to ask you for final thoughts, but it feels to me like that's a really great way to close. So
I would think so.
Yeah. I mean, I really feel like that. So I think for our listeners, if they want to get a hold of you, if they want to follow, if you want to find out more about what you're about or your insights, do tell.
Snail mail, smoke signals. I'm not online. Just kidding.
Send you a postcard.
Wouldn't that be something? What a hypocrite. If I was like, I don't believe in LinkedIn. Yeah, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. Most of my stuff is all Andrea, which is Andrea, and then LB, which is the phonetic spelling of Lechner-Becker, which I know isn't confusing at all. So it's EL, like a Spanish word, like El Matador, for example. And then B, like a bumblebee, LB. So that's what all of my hashtags are. So on Twitter, I'm Andrea LB. I don't know. I probably come up if you just search Lechner-Becker too. I don't know. And I'm also on the LeadMD website. I'm easy to find, I think. Come
Cool.
at me.
Ooh.
I'm just saying, like
Right.
I really am not one of those people that doesn't connect with people on LinkedIn or like doesn't get back to you. I'm extremely nerdy, right? So I just like creating relationships with tons of random people and talking about marketing or not. Like I give people advice on all sorts of things. Like I get, hey, look at this website. What do you think? And I give my opinion. So
Love that. I
know.
also know bourbon and beer. Those are another couple of things that a couple of things about, right?
Yeah, that's how you can bribe me into having a conversation with you. If you're a seller and you're like, how do I get Andrea on a call? Bribery works for me. And yeah, wine.com gift cards or anything where I can buy alcoholic beverages is welcome.
That's
and my
fantastic.
husband thanks you in advance as well, because I share.
Oh, we love it. Well, thanks for being a guest. It's been a pleasure to have you here today and have your insights. For those who've been listening, you've been listening to a conversation on what's wrong with CMOs and marketing today with Andrea Lechner-Becker on Summit Podcast. Until next week, I'm your host, Kyle Hamer. Thanks for tuning in, and we will keep on growing our businesses. Take care.